Hello. Today we are going to be doing a tier list relating to current NFL QBs for the 2023 season. Now this list relates to next year and this year combined, along with how I feel I would take my QBs if I was going to start a franchise. Starting off, we have Aaron Rodgers. I'd put Aaron Rodgers in the elite talent tier. Now, Rodgers was a back-to-back MVP just 2 seasons ago, but at 40 years old, coming off an Achilles injury, I still need to see him do more if I want to put him in that blank check tier, because he could not be the same player he once was coming off that injury next year. So I think I'll put him in elite talent tier because I know how good he can be. Next up, we have Baker Mayfield. I think he is a franchise quarterback. I think that he's a guy that I'd want leading my team. A guy that I think can win with the right situation, but can't carry a team. Next up, we have Will Levis. I think we need to see a bigger sample size from him. I think we only got to see like 8 games. Next up, we have Jake Browning. I think he's a capable backup, but that's all he really is in my opinion. Bryce Young, I'd put him in unproven because I still think we need to see more. Dak Prescott, I think he's a franchise QB personally. I think I'd put him a little above Baker Mayfield just because we've seen more out of him. I don't think he's a guy that can elevate talent around him, but I think he's a guy that with the right talent can deliver. Derek Carr, I think he's a franchise QB. I think that he did a lot with the Raiders, but I just think that consistently he hasn't gotten those playoff experience, never has won a playoff game in his career. It's hard for me to put him anything above that, but he's on the fringe of not being an NFL starter anymore, but I still think he's a capable franchise QB. Daniel Jones, I think we've seen this year, he's a fringe starter. I think that in his year that he got paid $40 million, he only threw 15 touchdowns in 2022. And this year we saw him be outplayed by Tommy DeVito and Tyrod Taylor, which I think speaks to the fact that he was massively overpaid, and the Giants in 2022 got really lucky winning a lot of games they shouldn't have. And having that playoff win really helped him, but I think that I'd put him in the fringe starter tier. Desmond Ridder, I think he's a backup. I think that he can do just enough to where he can come in and do solid in a couple games, but I don't think he's close to being a franchise QB personally. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, I think this guy isn't very good. I think he's currently an XFL caliber QB. I just don't think that he can see over anyone. I just didn't see much with him on the Browns. Geno Smith, I think he's a fringe starting QB. I think you could put him in franchise QB, but I'll put him in franchise QB actually. I think that he's done just enough to prove that he can have back-to-back winning seasons and do just enough to put him in that tier, but it's very close. Jared Goff, I think he's a high-end franchise QB. I think that the Rams gave up on him a little bit fast, but with the Lions this year, he proved a lot. And I think that he showed that he can be a franchise QB and take a team to a Super Bowl and an NFC Championship game with the Rams and with the Lions. Justin Herbert, I'd put him in the elite talent tier. I think that he hasn't done enough winning throughout his first 4 seasons of his career to put him in the blank check tier. I think that he needs to show me more, that he can be that guy that can carry the talent around him and win a playoff game. Because I've just seen nothing but a lot of stats, a lot of highlight plays, and not enough winning games. Next up, we have Jalen Hurts, who I'd put in the elite talent tier. I think that he's a solid passer, but his ability to run for those gritty first downs is what I think puts him at the elite talent tier. Had 2 pretty strong seasons back-to-back. Gets all those rushing TDs. I'd put him in the elite talent tier. Deshaun Watson, I think at this point, is a fringe starter. I think that he wasn't very good in 2022 or 2023, and coming off that injury, we'll see how he is. But ever since he took that long year off in 2020, it just has not been the same, and that's why I think he's a fringe starter currently. Josh Allen, I think, is the first blank check QB. I think that without him, the Buffalo Bills would be maybe a 5-win team. I think that he does so much. He's gotten them 4 straight division titles. I would not answer the phone on any calls for Josh Allen. I think he's a guy that you give him as much money as he wants. Justin Fields, I think that he's at the point where I think he's a fringe starter. He hasn't won enough games. He's 10-28 as a starter, so I don't think he's in that franchise QB yet, but I think he could get one more year, his 4th year, and if he proves himself, he could stay as the Bears QB, but we'll see if they move off him for Caleb Williams or not. Next up, we have Joe Burrow. I think he's an easy blank check guy. Only concern is injuries, but other than that, he's gotten to 2 AFC championships and a Super Bowl. I think that Joe Burrow can continue to lead the Bengals, and I think he could get them a Super Bowl soon. And I would hand the keys to the franchise to him. I wouldn't take any calls for him. Like, there's only a few guys I'd ever take over Joe Burrow. Kirk Cousins, I think he's a franchise QB. He's in that Jared Goff, Dak Prescott tier, where I don't think he can carry a team, but when he has great talent around him in the right situations, I think he's a guy that you could go far with, but I wouldn't put him in that elite talent tier. I think he was very valuable to the Vikings, and you saw it this year, and we'll see what he ends up doing in his future. Kenny Pickett, I'd put in the fringe starter tier. I think he had a similar year to Daniel Jones, where he just didn't do much, and he was kind of outplayed by Mason Rudolph at the end of the year, so I think he's a fringe starter. I think he could get one more year in Pittsburgh, but time's running out because he's got to start performing and playing better, or he could be on his way out. He could be leaning towards a career backup role if he doesn't prove himself. Kyler Murray, I think he's a franchise QB. I think that he's truly been a little bit overhated throughout his career. I think he's in that Trae Young stage where he started off really hot in his career, but I think that he's just undersized and had that injury, so I think people have kind of forgotten about him in a way, and he's on not the best franchise in the Arizona Cardinals, so I think that people have forgotten about him. Lamar Jackson's another blank check guy. I think that he's proven after he's going to get his 2nd MVP how valuable he is to the Ravens. I think his one concern is that he does not show up in the playoffs for some games. That's the only cause for concern for Lamar Jackson. But other than that, I think he's a blank check guy who you don't pick up the phone on calls from Lamar. Jordan Love, I think he's in that franchise QB already. We saw him throw 32 touchdowns this year. Look really good at the end of the year. But he's still got a lot to learn. But I think he's a franchise QB for sure. Mac Jones, I think he's a backup at this point. That's what I've seen. He's not very good. I don't think he's a starting QB in this league, and I think in 3 seasons he's kind of proven it. He's not accurate at all. Or he's accurate, but he can't make any plays at all. He kind of gets those happy feet. Doesn't have much strength to him. I think he's a backup. Gardner Minshew, I'd say he's on that fringe starter. I think that in the right situation, he can be a starting QB, and I think you saw him take the Colts to 9-8 with not a great roster. It's interesting I said 98 because he kind of looks like one of those guys from The Boys in 98 with the mullet and the stash. So that's why I think he's a fringe starter because he can win games, but I don't know if he's quite that franchise QB, but he's proven when he gets the chance that he can be a competent QB. Malik Cunningham, he's an XFL guy. Patriots have cut him. Josh Dobbs, I think he's a career backup, and it's kind of proven. He had that Linsanity run with the Vikings where he came off the bench and won them the game. But other than that, I just think Josh Dobbs is a little bit small and lacks the strength to be a starting QB. Patrick Mahomes, I think you could put him in a tier above these 3 guys, but I'd put him in blank check just because of how good he is. I think he is the best QB in football, and there's not really an argument against him. Brock Purdy, he's a franchise QB. I think that he's proven he's the Niners guy, and that's why I'd put him here. I think that he makes the right decisions, and he's won them the games that they've needed to win, and they've gotten to the Super Bowl because of him. So I'd put him in the franchise QB tier. Russell Wilson, I think he's still a franchise QB. He used to be in that blank check elite talent tier a few years ago, but I think he's just pretty much a glorified game manager at this point in his career. Makes just enough plays to win the Broncos the games when they need them, but doesn't do anything that pops the charts these days. Sam Howell, I think he's a fringe starter. I think he could use one more year with another team if he gets a chance. But he threw a lot of interceptions this year and was not very accurate. It was just pretty much a deep ball passer specifically. I think that he's a fringe starter. He could get another chance, but I could see him being a backup next year. Matt Stafford, I'd put him in the elite talent tier. I think that we've seen him carry this Rams team that no one expected to be this good, and he took them to the playoffs, which was very unexpected, and he turned Puka Nacua into one of the best receivers in the league. No one knew who this guy was before the year started. Look what he's doing now. I think that Stafford's definitely an elite talent. CJ Stroud, I think he's a blank check guy. I think it's pretty clear and obvious that he's the key to that Texans franchise. And although he's played 1 year, I think I can put him in that elite QB tier because I just know how good he is. And I would not entertain any trade offers for CJ Stroud at all. Ryan Tannehill, I think he's a backup at this point. He got benched for Will Levis, and I think that he just can't win a ton of games anymore, so I'd put him in the backup tier. He can win you a few, but he's not going to be a true starter anymore. Tim Boyle, XFL, he sucks. Next, Tommy DeVito, I think he proved this year that he can do a little bit as a backup. He's not going to pop the charts, but he can make the right decisions, and he can have that Italian stallion to him, which I think makes him a solid backup for his career. Taylor Heineke, I think he is a backup, and it's pretty well proven. That's where he is. Been a lot of teams throughout his career, and I think that I'd put him in the backup tier. Trevor Lawrence, I'd put him in the elite talent tier. I think that he can be in that blank check range, but with all that talent he had around him this year, I still think that he's a little bit away from being on that Joe Burrow, Josh Allen level. Next up, Trevor Siemian. I think that he has the chance to be the backup. I think he's been in the league a while. I'd put him there. Tua Tagovailoa. I think he's a franchise QB. I think that he struggled in the playoffs. He needs to be in a dome setting. The Dolphins struggled with injuries at the end of the year, but I think that Tua, at best right now, is a franchise QB that can make the right plays with the right talent around him, but not elevate the talent around him. Bailey Zappi, I think he's a backup. We can see him do a little bit of stuff, but is not going to be that consistent starting QB unless he really finds a rhythm. Zach Wilson, I think that this is the meme for him. XFL, one of the worst quarterbacks we've ever seen. Seen him play 2 good games this year, but he's gotten like 25 starts throughout his career and still is not looking like a starting QB. And Trey Lance has gotten 4 starts in his career, and people want to write him off already. The league just doesn't feel fair that way. Aiden O'Connell, I think he's a backup. I think that we've clearly seen that he can make enough plays with the decent amount of talent around him, but in that Chiefs game, he could not complete a pass, and you saw that on display. He got shut out by the Vikings. I think he's a backup. I think Jimmy Garoppolo, he was so bad this year. I'd put him in XFL. Like, there was not one good game this guy had. And Jaron Hall, he was terrible this year. I'd put him in XFL. He could barely complete a forward pass. Nick Mullins, I think he is a backup. I think he's on this tier being an XFL guy, but he could throw for a lot of yards. He would throw a lot of picks, but he can be a backup in my opinion. Joe Flacco, I think he just needs to retire, so I'm going to put him in solid backup because we saw that Linsanity run he had, but I think he just needs to retire. Mitch Trubisky, I think he's a career backup. That's all he is. Just get him into a situation where he can play like his 2018 self, but other than that, I think he's a career backup. CJ Beathard, easy career backup. Jameis Winston, I think he's a backup at this point. All he can really do is come in for a little bit and hold a clipboard and maybe win you a few games if you need. And then Anthony Richardson only got to play a few games this year. I'd put him in Unproven. And that is my QB tier list for guys that I'd want in my future.